Hello, I'm Ryan.
Hello, I am Amy. Welcome to Listen to English Podcast. Today's episode is about 9 bad habits that ruin your English. Things that you might be doing that are preventing you from making faster progress in your English studies.
That's a great topic, Amy, and I think it'll be useful for our listeners because we all have habits, good and bad, and sometimes we don't even realize that the bad habits are holding us back.
Right. It appears that many students get so caught up in grammar rules, for example, that they forget about actually using the language in real-life situations. They might spend hours studying verb tenses, but then they're afraid to speak because they're worried about making a mistake.
Having a good understanding of grammar is important, of course, but it shouldn't be the only thing that you focus on. The key is to find a balance between studying the rules and actually using the language.
I totally agree with you, Ryan. Studies show that when you immerse yourself in the language, for example, by listening to podcasts, watching movies, or talking to native speakers, you will naturally start to internalize the grammar rules. It's like learning to swim by jumping into the pool instead of just reading a book about swimming. You need to get in there and practice.
That's a great way to put it, Amy. You need to get out there and practice. Another common bad habit that can really hinder your progress is translating everything in your head.
Yeah.
It appears that many English learners do this automatically. They will hear a word or phrase in English and then immediately try to translate it into their native language. But this can actually slow you down and prevent you from thinking in English.
You're right. If you are always translating in your head, it's like having a wall between you and the language. You are not really engaging with the language directly. You are always filtering it through your native language. If you want to become fluent in English, you need to start thinking in English.
I think a good tip for that is to start small. You don't need to try to think in English for every single thought that you have. Just start with simple things, like describing objects around you in English or thinking about your daily routine in English. The more you do it, the easier it will become.
Yes, and it's also important to be patient with yourself. It takes time to develop this skill, and you will make mistakes along the way. But that's okay. Everyone makes mistakes when they are learning a new language. It appears that many learners are so afraid of making mistakes that they're afraid to speak at all.
Right.
They are so worried about saying the wrong thing or sounding silly that they avoid speaking altogether. But the truth is that making mistakes is an essential part of the learning process.
Exactly, Ryan. Mistakes are your friends. When you make a mistake, it means that you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. And that's how you learn and grow. I think it's helpful to reframe how you think about mistakes.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing them as failures, see them as opportunities for learning and growth. Each time you make a mistake, you have a chance to learn something new and improve your English.
That's a great point, Ryan. And studies show that learners who are not afraid to make mistakes actually make faster progress than those who are afraid to speak up. So embrace your mistakes, learn from them, and keep moving forward. Another bad habit that we need to talk about is relying too heavily on textbooks.
Ah, yes, the textbook trap. It appears that many English learners think that the only way to learn English is to sit down with a textbook and study grammar rules and vocabulary lists. But while textbooks can be useful tools, they shouldn't be your only source of learning. It's important to get exposure to real-world English as well.
Absolutely. Real-world English is often much different from the English that you find in textbooks. People use slang, idioms, and phrasal verbs all the time, and they don't always speak in perfect grammatical sentences.
So how can our listeners get more exposure to real-world English?
Well, there are many different ways. One is to watch movies and TV shows in English. Another is to listen to podcasts or music in English. And of course, the best way to learn real-world English is to talk to native speakers as much as possible.
Right.
And when you are watching movies or TV shows in English, don't be afraid to use subtitles at first. This can help you to follow along with the dialogue and pick up new vocabulary. But as you start to get more comfortable, try watching without subtitles. This will force you to rely on your listening skills and really pay attention to what is being said.
That's a great tip. Another bad habit that I see a lot of English learners making is not practicing their listening skills enough.
It's true. It appears that many learners focus so much on reading and writing that they neglect their listening skills. But listening is just as important as any other skill when it comes to learning a language.
I would say it's even more important, especially if you plan to live in an English-speaking country or work in an English-speaking environment.
Right.
If you can't understand what people are saying to you, it will be very difficult to communicate effectively.
Exactly.
So how can our listeners improve their listening skills?
Well, the key is to listen to as much English as possible.
Okay.
And there are many different ways to do this. You can listen to podcasts, audiobooks, music, news reports, or even just conversations between native speakers. And when you are listening, don't just passively listen. Try to actively engage with the material. Pay attention to the pronunciation, the intonation, the rhythm of the speech. Try to identify the main ideas and supporting details. And if you don't understand something, don't be afraid to rewind and listen again. Another helpful tip is to use transcripts when you are listening. This can help you to follow along with the dialogue and make sure that you are understanding everything correctly. But again, as you start to get more comfortable, try listening without the transcript.
Those are all great tips. I think another important thing to remember is that listening takes time and practice. You are not going to become a perfect listener overnight. Just keep practicing and exposing yourself to as much English as possible, and you will gradually start to improve.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just like with speaking, making mistakes is a part of the learning process when it comes to listening. So don't get discouraged if you don't understand everything perfectly at first. Just keep practicing and you will get there. It appears that many English learners only use English when they are in class or when they're doing their homework. But if you want to become fluent in English, you need to find ways to use it outside of the classroom as well.
You are absolutely right. I'm going to repeat that because it is so important. If you want to become fluent in English, you need to find ways to use it outside of the classroom. It's kind of like learning to play a musical instrument. If you only practice once a week for an hour, you're not going to improve very quickly. But if you practice every day, even if it's just for 15 or 20 minutes, you'll see much faster results.
That's a great analogy, Ryan. And it's the same with English. The more you use it, the better you will become. So how can our listeners find ways to use English in their daily lives?
Well, there are many different things that you can do. One simple thing is to change the language settings on your phone or computer to English. That way you'll be exposed to English every time you use your device.
That's a great idea. And you can also try reading English books, newspapers, or websites, or listening to English music or podcasts while you are commuting or exercising. And of course, try to talk to native English speakers as much as possible.
Right.
It appears that many learners are afraid to speak English because they're worried about making mistakes. But you just need to find some patient native speakers who are willing to help you.
Yeah.
You can join a language exchange group or find an online tutor. There are many different ways to find people to practice with. The important thing is just to start speaking.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Remember what we talked about last week? Mistakes are a natural part of the learning process.
Right.
In fact, they are essential for learning. So don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back from speaking.
I think that is a great message for all of our listeners out there. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And if you make a mistake, just laugh it off and keep going. The important thing is to keep practicing and keep using English as much as possible. It's like anything else in life. The more you practice, the better you'll get.
And that brings us to another important habit that we need to talk about, which is setting realistic goals.
Yes.
It appears that many English learners set themselves up for failure by setting unrealistic goals. They might say, I want to be fluent in English in 3 months, or I want to get a Band 9 on the IELTS exam next month. But these goals are just not realistic for most people.
Yes. And when you set unrealistic goals for yourself, you are more likely to get discouraged and give up. It's important to set smaller, more achievable goals that you can actually reach. So instead of saying, I want to be fluent in English in 3 months, try saying, I want to be able to have a basic conversation in English in 3 months. Or instead of saying, I want to get a Band 9 on the IELTS exam next month, try saying, I want to improve my IELTS score by 1 band next month. Those are much more achievable goals. And when you reach a small goal, it gives you a sense of accomplishment and motivates you to keep going. It's like climbing a mountain. You don't start by trying to climb to the top in one day. You break the climb down into smaller stages, and you celebrate each stage that you reach. It's the same with English learning. Break your big goals down into smaller goals and celebrate each small victory along the way.
I love that analogy, Amy. Breaking down big goals into smaller goals and celebrating your accomplishments is so important.
Yeah.
And speaking of celebrating your accomplishments, I think another important habit that we need to talk about is finding ways to enjoy the learning process. It appears that many English learners see English learning as a chore, something that they have to do but don't really enjoy. And I think it's because they've had a bad experience with learning English in the past. Maybe they had a really strict teacher, or they were forced to memorize long lists of vocabulary words.
Yes, and when you don't enjoy something, you are less likely to do it. So if you are not enjoying your English studies, you are less likely to make progress.
Exactly. So how can our listeners find ways to enjoy the learning process?
Well, there are many different ways. One is to find learning materials that you are interested in. If you are interested in a particular topic, try reading or listening to material about that topic in English. Or, if you love music, listen to English songs and try to sing along. If you are a movie buff, watch English movies and TV shows. There are so many different ways to learn English, so find something that you enjoy and that you are interested in.
Yes, and another thing you can do is to find ways to make learning English more interactive. Don't just sit down with a textbook and study grammar rules. Get out there and use English in real-world situations. Talk to people, join a language exchange group, or travel to an English-speaking country. The more you use English in real-world situations, the more fun it will be.
And the more fun it is, the more you want to do it, and the more progress you'll make. It's a win-win situation.
One of the key things that we have emphasized throughout this series is the importance of immersion, surrounding yourself with the English language as much as possible. This is something that I can't stress enough.
Studies show that learners who immerse themselves in the language make much faster progress than those who don't. And it makes sense, right? If you are constantly exposed to English, you will naturally start to pick it up.
Absolutely. It's like learning to swim by swimming. You can't just read a book about swimming and expect to be able to jump in the pool and start swimming laps.
Exactly. You need to get in the water and practice. And it's the same with English. You need to get out there and use the language. The more you use it, the better you'll get.
But I know that it can be difficult to find opportunities to immerse yourself in English, especially if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
You're right, Ryan. It can be tough. But there are definitely things that you can do, even if you are living in a country where English is not the native language.
So what can we do?
Well, for starters, think about all of the technology that we have access to these days. We have smartphones, computers, tablets, TVs, and more. All of these devices can be used to immerse yourself in English.
That's a great point, Amy. I never really thought of it like that before, but you're right. It's so easy to access English language content these days. You can watch movies and TV shows, listen to music and podcasts, read news articles and books, and even play video games, all in English.
Exactly. And don't forget about social media. You can follow English-speaking accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can join English learning groups on Facebook and other social media platforms.
There are just so many different ways to get exposure to English these days. It's amazing.
It really is. And the best part is that most of this content is free or very affordable.
That's true. You don't need to spend a lot of money to immerse yourself in English.
And another thing that I would add is that you don't need to spend hours and hours every day doing this. Even just a few minutes here and there can make a difference.
Right. It's about consistency. If you can find a way to incorporate English into your daily routine, even in small ways, you'll be surprised at how much progress you make over time.
I think that's a great message to leave our listeners with. Find ways to make English a part of your daily life, and you will see amazing results.
Absolutely. And don't forget to have fun. If you're not enjoying yourself, you're less likely to stick with it.
That's true. Find something that you enjoy doing in English, and you'll be much more likely to keep doing it.
Well, Amy, I think this has been a really informative deep dive into some of the bad habits that English learners should try to avoid. Any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Just remember that learning English is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs along the way, but the important thing is to keep moving forward. So keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep having fun.
Great advice, Amy. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening to the Listen to English podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.